All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here. Today, we're going to be talking numbers. We're talking win rates, matchup spreads, everything. I don't make these types of videos too often because I think, most of the time I deal with all of this data and I crunch all of the numbers, off camera. And then that's how I kind of come up with recommending certain decks and, analyzing the metagame in terms of on a predictive basis, telling you which decks you should play. But today I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to talk about it because this season in particular is very interesting, very spread out, not very top heavy. And I don't think that anything has really solidified itself in terms of like a metagame trend. And we have a couple weeks left of the season. So I think that this is going to be an interesting video for anybody that really wants to dive a little bit deeper in terms of the data. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also register for PMPT number 27. You got to go do that here. It should be posted, by the way. We're on limitless.com. That's what you see right here, play.limitless. So if you go to tournaments, you can actually just like filter. If you go like tournaments upcoming, and then you can filter by Pokemon Pocket. You'll see if you scroll all the way down, I believe we're on April 12th is what the tournament, April 11th right here. Hyper Shine. Already 60 people registered. You got to love that. But here you go. You click right here and you can go and register. We updated our page as well. Looks very fancy. So again, there you go. But what we're going to do is go to the Dex tab for Limitless right here. So if you go to Dex, you can actually filter again by Pokemon Pocket, and then it's going to show you all of the data, cumulative data for this entire season. Now you got to be careful because the cumulative data for the season isn't always that well accurate. It's not, it's things are very different at the beginning of the season than they are on week 2, week 3, week 4. So it's not necessarily the most timely data, but one thing that's really good for this particular page is to understand the matchup spreads, because Dex kind of are categorized pretty accurately on Limitless throughout the entirety of the season. So here is the cumulative data for the season. 64 tournaments, 8,600 players, and 23,000 total matches. Shout out to everybody that competes in Pokemon Pocket tournaments. These are the most played decks in order. So Suicune Excalibur, 11%. Which, by the way, is kind of crazy. So typically the most played decks of the season, the number one deck, is sitting anywhere from like 15 to 25% meta share. And 25% is like, approaching that, tier. I always define it, if a deck is at 20 or more percent meta share, that's like a tier 0 type meta. Here, the most played deck is barely 10%, which is absolutely incredible. The diversity of quality decks this season. I've been saying that like every video. So many strong cards. But anyway, number one is Suicune Excalibur. Number two is Hydreigon. Now, this doesn't tell you the trend. I wish there was some trending information. But we're going to take a look at an additional website also in this video that's super useful. So you're going to have to wait to see what that website's all about. We're not sponsored by any of these websites, by the way. I just use these because I'm a geek for Pokemon Pocket. But Hydreigon, second most played deck. This is on the rise. So I'll tell you that right now. Hydreigon on the rise, number 2 most played deck. Shortly behind Suicune, 9.27% meta share. Both of these decks, great win rates. So really kind of solidifying themselves as the number 1 and number 2 decks, regardless of, which you kind of, want to rank them. These are definitely the most played decks, but also the best decks. And then below you have what I kind of consider are like the new contenders that aren't necessarily, I think, on par with some of the already solidified archetypes like Suicune Excalibur and Hydreigon with 52 and 53% win rates, respectively. Third, fourth, and fifth place is the Sleep Mega Altaria deck with Darkrai Igglybuff. This is 6.5% meta share. Charizard, Mega Charizard XY, the fourth most played deck at 6% meta share. Again, both of these are close to 50%. And then Mega Scizor right here, the fifth most played deck with Reverum, 5.5% meta share. And that's a 48.5% win rate. So these three decks, I would say performing a little bit lower than, the other decks below and above them, which to me tells me that these decks are either not necessarily super refined. And even though they are probably very strong decks, in fact, I am very confident that all three of these decks here are very good. Sleep Altaria, Charizard, and Scizor, very strong decks, but maybe not as well positioned as they maybe should be, considering all of the other decks that are seeing play this season. So again, very interesting data. The sixth most played deck, which is surprising to me, is Mega Manectric and Zeraora. I guess that this comes down to the fact that there's a lot of different versions of Manectric and Lightning decks, so they typically don't approach the most played decks. The actual archetypes and deck lists themselves are very much non-standardized for Lightning type. That's always how it is. So the sixth most played deck, that's only 4.5% meta share, but a 52.75% win rate. So Manectric is still very good. All of these Lightning decks are honestly pretty good, except for Jolteon, which is really struggling. Yeah. Anyway, but Magnezone, Manectric also doing well. So I think Manectric definitely kind of belongs in that top category. But then below that, we have Steelix, which has been a massive surprise for me personally this season. The 7th most played deck, 3.5% meta share. That's a 52% win rate. Very, very respectable. And as we see, Mega Altaria and Greninja, which is the most played Chingling deck. So out of all of these decks, as you see right now, you know, Chingling is very much not seeing much play in any of these, which is actually kind of crazy. And I think Chingling is very, very smart to be played right now. And I think any Altaria deck will benefit more from playing Chingling than really any other cards still. And I think Chingling should see play with Altaria. However, the number one most successful Altaria deck, if you're not playing the Sleep version, is going to be Chingling and Greninja. 8th most played deck, 3% of the meta, and that's a 52.5% win rate. And yeah, these are like the most played decks. So if you scroll down, it's got every deck, basically every deck that people play. Yeah, very spread out. I would say that realistically, there is probably 8 to 10 like really solid archetypes that deserve to see play. I think you could fit Magnezone in there. They split Magnezone up in a couple of different archetypes, but Magnezone definitely deserves to be in like the top 8. Charizard gets split up as well, so that's probably potentially like the 3rd most played deck, or even close to 2nd if they were to condense these archetypes. Limitless kind of splits those out. Dark Greninja, very respectable. Again, Magnezone, very respectable. And if we go down here, Giratina Darkrai doesn't have a great overall average win rate, but has been performing well recently. And if we go down even further, Mega Charizard Y seems to be doing well, as well as Venusaur. So Venusaur at a 50% win rate, 51%. But what I like to do on this page, in this video, which I think is always interesting, is filter by win rate. So, you know, discounting like what decks are the most played and sample sizes and all that, we can actually just take a look at which decks are winning a higher percentage of their games, and we'll just filter by win rate. The data here is always hilarious, but let's see what we get here. I haven't even tried it yet. All right, and there you go. Okay, so like this is always really funny to me. So this number on the left is the ranking in terms of how what this deck is like in terms of the most played, and then over here like the count of how many people have played it this season, and it's win rate, and we're filtering by the win rate now. And no surprise, it's hilarious to me, but there's really no surprise that the most highest win rate decks so far this season are Magnezone decks. So Magnezone or Choreo, standard Mag Choreo, 56.5% win rate. Now, again, I do think this number is somewhat inflated because of the low count, so it's a small sample size. But right below it is Magnezone and Teal Mask Ogerpon, which is actually the most played Magnezone archetype, and this has a 55, almost a 55% win rate. And then below that is actually Bellybolt with Teal Mask Ogerpon, which is an interesting deck list I want to take a look at. But Turbo Bellybolt with 1 Ogerpon. So again, like the information here is always going to be really interesting to take a look at. We're filtering by the most highest win rate decks so far this season. And look at Mega Altaria EX, which is non-Greninja and non-Darkrai. So just standard Altaria. Here's like an example, because like this archetype is very much wide open, but Magma Chocolate's deck here from March 30th. We'll take a look here. That's just an example, but this is like the toolbox Altaria. So Altaria Chingling with Comfey, with Lele, with Klefki, like Altaria is still really strong, but to me, for whatever the reason, if we filter by the share, we see that this 3rd most played Mega Altaria deck isn't actually even the most successful Altaria deck in terms of win rates, like by kind of a wide margin. And I find that to be very interesting. So again, you know, the numbers here on the left, like basically you want to take a look at, do you want this number to be as small as possible, or rather you want the count to be as high as possible, because that means a larger sample size, which means more data and we can be more confident in that win rate statistic, right? So a lot of these decks haven't really seen that much play, right? So like Magnezone or Choreo, only 40 people played it. Bellybolt, only 18 people have played it. You know, like Dark Arceus with a 53.5% win rate, only 44 people playing Dark Arceus here. Let's take a look at an example. This is probably, a totally fine deck this season, but are people going to sit here and tell me that this is like one of the best decks to play right now? It might be. What we're going to do is take a look at the matchup spreads after this to really kind of calculate which decks you probably should be playing. But this is just very interesting data, you know, like are these the decks that you expected? Guzzlord and DD. Only 25 people have played this season, 81 and 59, and this is that stall Guzzlord deck, which to be fair got kind of taken out by Steelix because they're very similar, but most people just play Steelix because, you know, it can kind of get around the Oricorio stuff. But interesting, right, that this deck list in a small sample size has such a high win rate. Blaziken Greninja, we put it as our weekly wildcard on Friday because it started to place extremely well in tournaments. The 31st most played deck, only 43 people have played it, but it has a 53.2% win rate. And this is a player actually at our tournament recently. Again, that had a really good record. So decks like this this information is always very interesting because what it tells me is that there likely are really strong, strategies and decks that people just really aren't playing that much, because I think there's a solid difference between what's popular and what's good. And sometimes things surprise you. So that's why this information is very relevant, right? So just by looking at this immediately, I can tell you like with confidence that Magnezone or Ikoria was likely still an incredibly strong choice right now. And then Altaria with Jingling is going to be very, very good. And that these three archetypes like Guzzlord, Arceus, Blaziken are probably better than they deserve, than people give them credit for, right? These are decks that are just winning. Strong decks. Now, if we go down a little bit, you'll notice that Hydreigon here is pretty high up on the list in terms of its average win rate, but it's also the second most played deck. So we have an incredibly large sample here, which to me means that kind of far and away, Hydreigon is the most successful or the best deck to play so far throughout this season, right? The second most played deck, but it's already up here with other decks that have much smaller sample sizes. Like if we're not accounting the Magnezone decks, Hydreigon is far and away just sort of the strongest deck to play right now. And Manectric is very respectful up here at 6. The sixth most played deck with a 52.5% win rate. Mega Altaria Greninja, 52.5% win rate. So these are kind of decks that probably should also see more play, but they are still seeing play. The sixth and eighth most played decks. So these are definitely defined meta decks right now that should probably stick around. And then Steelix. Steelix is actually above Suicune Baxcalibur, which is the #1 most played deck. So yeah, it's always interesting to take a look at. And here's the Altaria and Igglybuff deck here, which again isn't bad. These sleep decks really aren't bad, but I think the more that I notice, the more they fall closer to 50%. And that's sort of kind of what you would expect for a coin flip deck, right? Is that the more coins you flip, the closer, your win rate's probably going to fall to 50%. And I find that to be very interesting because this archetype really does defend on flipping coins, like very much so. And Venusaur kind of slept on, the best Charizard deck from a win rate perspective is just Mega Charizard Y. We talked about that. I think that makes sense with how much, Mega Pokemon are seeing play right now. And I think that's probably somewhat correct here. Venusaur is a bit of a surprise here. Look, somebody recently, this is Njord, went 8-2-1, yeah, playing Mega Venusaur. And I always take a look at things and I try to be as objective as possible because I know it's easy to have like a subjective understanding of how decks are or, what you might think is good, but the data always reigns supreme. Like I always define decks mostly based around the data because that's what's the most relevant. But these are the most winningest decks so far this season. Kind of surprising, but there's some clear outliers here that are very, very respectable. I mean, I honestly think Mega Altaria Igglybuff is totally fine. I'm not saying it's a bad deck. It probably deserves to be like a top tier deck in the metagame, but honestly, like I would probably play like a different types of Altaria. Like I think Altaria Greninja and even just standard Altaria is probably a better deck list, but anything with Altaria seemingly is quite strong. And then the other thing that's really interesting to take a look at is based around every single deck that is in this data. So every deck that anyone's played this season, there's only this many decks that have above a 50% win rate. And I don't know how many this is, but it's not that many considering there's probably hundreds and hundreds of decks that are here in this data. Like think about all of these decks that people are playing. You can actually see. So there's 630 different decks that people have played just this season. And there's probably only, I don't even know how many this is. Not too many that are above a 50% win rate. So it's interesting like how top heavy things are. So you'll notice that we showed all the decks. So this isn't counting things with very, very small sample sizes that have had like one or two tournaments where they did really well. So this is the data that we don't like to show because this is the stuff that's like tremendous outliers. Like, Manectric Luxray, like one person played it at maybe a small tournament, maybe not. 124 players, 18th place. And that is the highest win rate deck because it only got played once and had a 75% win rate. So a lot of these are only one or two sample sizes. Decidueye Sunflora is crazy, yo. Let's take a look at some of these decks because what is going on? I think that the Quick Grow Beam Sunflora is a massively underrated card because Quick Growth Extract is actually pretty strong. I love this type of deck. So like Decidueye with Sunflora is hilarious to see it on here. But it's up there. What is it? 2 people played it with a 9-5 record. One person went 2-3, but one person went 7-2. Which is pretty funny. We have a Quaquaval Palafin deck that went 4-2. Like some of this stuff is just crazy, man. Mega Gardevoir and Mew-EX did well at a tournament, I guess. What is this Altaria deck, though? Let me take a look at this. 3rd out of 145. So this is probably just going to be, so it's really just a toolbox Altaria deck, which again, I think is probably really, really good. Jumpluff, Ogerpon. Like, but look at this record. So they went 3-2-1 and then 1-2 and 0. So like, I don't know what to think of these. You know what I mean? Like, what is like, that's why this data is probably not that relevant, but this is Jump Left or Ikoria with Ogre Pawn, which is so funny. It's always really, really interesting. The Slacking deck, remember when Slacking got released? Absolutely insane. Mousehold Blacephalon. That we're just going on a massive tangent right now, but this is data that this is probably at a singleton tournament. Now that I take a look at this list. Serenity format, yeah. And that's the other thing is that we're filtering by standard format, but a lot of these tournaments are listed as standard but have like restrictive rule sets, which is what also might be skewing some of the data here on some of these like really low sample size deck lists. So I don't typically like to filter by every single deck in the game, but like basically, if you take a look at this metagame, there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. There's probably like 25 to 30 decks that are remotely worth playing so far this season that people have played, which doesn't seem that much, but honestly, it is kind of a lot. But anyway, these are the highest win rate decks. Magnezone is at the top, and I know people are going to think that's hilarious, but it's the truth, man. Magnezone or Ikoria wins games, like more than mostly anything else. It's still incredibly strong. And yeah, Hydreigon far and away. Because, you know, the other thing to mention that I always try to tell people is like the more a deck sees play, the closer it'll fall to a 50% win rate because it'll hit its own matchup. So like Magnezone or Hydreigon and Mega Absol here, it's probably like one of its most played matchups. Yeah, so it's played itself 662 times, which means like literally it always will get a win and a loss. So that's what brings this deck closer to 50%. But really, we talked about this the other day. Like, it's only really losing matchups are to Suicune Excalibur at 43%, and then Mega Altarian Greninja at 38%. But the matchups are what we're going to go into next. And there is actually another website that I wanted to talk about here to illustrate this matchup data, because I find it to be very interesting. This is going to be TopDex.com. The link to this website will be down in the description below. We are on the Metagame tab here, which has, again, all of the same data from Limitless. So I want to talk about that. Basically, the person who designed this website took the API and all of the data from Limitless and kind of made their own website utilizing that data. And there's some really cool graphs and matrices to define this. So as we see here, these are the deck representations. Just like we saw in Limitless, these are the most played decks this season. It says here the highest win rate is actually Guzzlord and Indeedee, so it's interesting that it's pulling from this data and has a 58% win rate, even though on Limitless, as we just checked, that's a little bit different. But yeah, the most popular deck is Suicune Excalibur. 660 unique decks is crazy. And yeah, but what I wanted to do was go down, and these are the deck's win rates. So again, like this is what we were kind of seeing right here, and what we illustrated is that, you know, we have the two top dogs, Suicune and Hydreigon. Then we have three new decks that are strong, but really people I think are playing them because they're new and not necessarily because they're well positioned in the metagame. And then below them, we have three decks that are well positioned in the metagame. So Manectric, Steelix, and then Altaria and Greninja, which is pretty cool. But this right here, the decks matchup here, this is what I want to take a look at, because this to me is like probably the most useful graph that anybody will ever need throughout this entire season. Because again, we're going into like the second or third week of the season. So the decks are pretty defined. It's not that common that middle of the season like this, a brand new deck pops up that we haven't seen in the previous weeks. And then, you know, kind of takes over. Like that probably won't happen. The vast majority of the decks that you're going to see and play, whether you're playing in ranked or in tournaments, are these decks right here. These are the most played 8 decks in the metagame. So from Suicune Excalibur, Hydreigon, Altaria, and Darkrai or Igglybuff, Charizard, Steelix, Manectric, I always say Steelix, Scizor, Manectric, Steelix, and then Altaria and Greninja. And this graph is going to show us how these decks match up against all of the other decks in this matrix. So this is the information you want to take a look at. Now, basically, if you have the matchup spreads right here available to you, all you have to do is sort of get a feel for which decks are becoming more and more popular. And then from there, you can make a very educated choice as to which decks you should be playing. And at least here in the top 8. So Suicune Excalibur has a 55% win rate into Hydreigon. It's actually highlighting the good matchups and the bad matchups. It's got a 72% matchup into Charizard, so a very good matchup there. But basically sub 50% matchups across the board into Sleep Altaria, and this does account for ties, so probably about a 50-50 into Sleep Altaria, about a 50-50, I would say, into Steelix and Reverum, but struggling into Manectric, struggling into Steelix, and struggling into Altaria and Greninja. So Suicune Excalibur is interesting. It's actually losing to pretty solid archetypes, but the ones that it's losing to are much less popular, or at least so far, than these decks that it's beating, right? So that's the thing. Hydreigon's on the rise. So Suicune Excalibur, even though it does lose pretty hardly, doesn't have a great matchup into these 3 decks, These 3 decks right here are played a lot more so far this season. Sleep Altaria, Hydreigon, and Charizard, right? So if you think that a lot of people will be playing Hydreigon up and coming, then, you know, Suicune could be a pretty strong choice. Or Greninja Altarian, which we'll talk about. This deck is absolutely insane. Hydreigon next. So, again, bad matchups into Suicune back Excalibur. 50-50, basically across the board, but does have good matchups into Manectric and to Steelix, but is losing to Greninja Altaria. So, since Hydreigon's on the rise here, it's the second most played deck, but likely going to be the most played deck soon. I really think that Altaria and Greninja here, and this data does reflect it, deserves to see more play and likely is going to be probably one of the better picks moving forward. Because if we skip down to it, basically it's got a couple of bad matchups into Sleep Altaria, pretty apparently, and then into Oricorio or Lightning, Manectric, and Zeraora. So those are its bad matchups. Now, Sleep Altaria is seeing a lot of play, but it's seeing less and less play as the season goes on. And I think that a lot of people, if they're going to play one Altaria deck, they're likely going to stick with Altaria. So even though Altaria and Igglybuff is the 3rd most played deck, I think that it probably should be swapped here for Altaria and Greninja. Because if you're playing Sleep Altaria, your matchups into Suicune and Hydreigon and Charizard aren't nearly as good as Greninja and Altaria. So like that's the one you should be playing, even though in the head-to-head it doesn't do as well. Right? Which is very interesting. That's such a strange occurrence here. And yes, you will struggle into the lightning type decks, but at least we're not struggling into Suicune and Hydreigon. In fact, those are 2 very good matchups, close to 60%. Charizard and Steelix, also 60%. So this to me is far and away kind of one of the best decks. But a big surprise to me is Steelix, because I don't think a lot of people maybe think that Steelix is one of the best decks, but it really is a top tier deck. 66% into Suicune, which is very, very good. Does lose a little bit to Hydreigon, but 43% is quite winnable. 54% into Sleep Altaria, so actually a good matchup. Very bad into Charizard, and we knew that would always be the case, but really good into Scizor, and really good into Lightning. So to me, it really feels like Steelix is incredibly well positioned. I mean, like, you know, like, yeah, I mean, the Hydreigon matchup's not great, but it's not terrible to any degree, and really good matchups into Suicune, Scizor, and Lightning. And I think having a good matchup into Manectric, Lightning, and Suicune is a really, really big deal. Yeah. The other things here, and look at Manectric too. So good into Suicune, good into Altaria, good into Charizard, but bad into Hydreigon. And as we know, Hydreigon's sort of on the rise right now. So these lightning type decks, although they're very well positioned right now, maybe a little bit scary. They're going to be going up against a lot of Hydreigon. So, you know, basically you want to hit the things here. If you want to beat Hydreigon, you got to play Suicune back Excalibur or Altaria and Greninja. Everything else is going to just kind of lose to it, which is tough. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the data here. Like Scizor here, very middling across the board. Definitely a strong deck, but not very well positioned. You're going to lose to Fire, and you're not doing very well into Steelix or Altaria Greninja, even though you are holding your own against the 3 most played decks, which is pretty cool. This is the matchup spread. This is the data that you should be looking at here. Go to TopDex.com and take a look at this. But basically, and I can kind of read the numbers all like as much as possible here, but this is the data that is going to be the most useful to you guys, I think, moving forward. So I wanted to share that in today's video. Just wanted to kind of talk about how things are going right now in the metagame. Very spread out, you know, very spread. I don't think things are going to really settle. I don't think we're going to see like a definitive, you know, like end point of this season. I think we only have like 2.5 weeks left. By the time the season's over, no one deck will have completely dominated. Like I said, if we go back to Limitless, you can take a look at what the most played decks are. And I think right now, even though Suicune's the most played deck, I think Hydreigon will likely kind of take over. We're probably going to see both of these decks float around 10%, which will likely remain for the rest of the season because I think they are the best decks. But all 3 of these decks here, Altaria, Igglybuff, Charizard, and Scizor, and Rivaroom, I think will all dip a little bit, probably fall closer to about 5%. And I think these 3 decks should rise back up to closer to 5% or higher. And that to me kind of really justifies, or I guess explains what's going on in the metagame. We really have about 8 different decks right now as seen in the Matrix that all interact with each other on a pretty even basis in a very interesting, you know, matchup spread. It's crazy. And I don't think that the Pocket developers really intended for this, but this season in particular has, and I know there's 2 different Altaria decks on here, but if you don't count the double Altaria, you have Suicune, Hydreigon, Altaria, Charizard, Scizor, Manectric, and Steelix, which is crazy. Those are all top tier meta contending decks. And that doesn't even include things like Venusaur and anything else that maybe isn't in the top 8 most played decks, but is still very, very strong choice this season. Yeah, it's crazy to me that like that's kind of how balanced this metagame is. But you know, the trend to look at here is that what's interesting is basically every deck here, other than the two most played decks, which is funny, are playing Mega Pokemon. And I know Mega Absol is in Hydreigon, but it's not really a Mega Pokemon deck. Suicune Excalibur is the only top tier deck that does not play a Mega Pokemon. And that is really crazy, that Mega Pokemon have basically completely taken over the metagame. And if you're not playing Megas, you got to play Suicune. Or Hydreigon, but Hydreigon does play a Mega Pokemon. So the trend is here. And I think if you looked back like 3 or 4 months ago, you would definitely see that most of the top tier decks were not playing Mega Pokemon. And I find that to be very interesting, even after Mega Pokemon released. But yeah, what did you guys think here? What did you guys think here? This website's really, really great. A couple of standouts if you scroll down, like there's Magnus and Oricorio doing really well. Standard Altaria doing quite well. Blaziken Greninja's doing quite well. These are decks that are probably underrated. You know, Guzzlord maybe as well. If we go down, what is this? Yeah, Belly Bolt. Turbo Belly Bolt with that Ogerpon seems to be still a really strong deck. So comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. This was a quick video. I just wanted to highlight this and kind of, again, explain my process and kind of put the numbers out there because I think some people are kind of, you know, interested in it. But, you know, there wasn't a whole lot to like really, this type of a video is strange, right? It's not kind of typically what I do, but I just wanted to get it out to you guys. I was going to do a tier list, but I think this video kind of fits the bill in a lot of ways as what a tier list does. Yeah, I think Ranked comes out like this Friday, or is it this weekend or is it next week? I forget. Ranked should be coming out soon. We have PMPT number 27 this weekend. And then the weekend after that is the Invitational Tournament. But Champions is releasing. I suspect a lot of people that play Pokemon Pocket will likely be playing Champions for the near future. And at least trying it out. I know I will be. So there's going to be a lot of videos going to the Champions channel, but I will continue to put out content here for Pokemon Pocket because I love to do it. Yeah, go check out TopDex.com, a very useful website. A very, very useful website, very cool website. And of course, always check out Limitless and use that Limitless data because it's very, very helpful. The numbers don't lie, and I love numbers. So, yeah, there we go. That's the video. Let's wrap it up here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace out, guys. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of this season. What deck are you playing? Which deck do you think is slept on, deserves to see more play? How do you define how good a deck is? That's also a very interesting thing to know. Hydreigon did win this weekend, so I think it's kind of up there, but you know, will it be up there for the remainder of the season, right? That's what's interesting. That's what's always interesting. But anyway, all right, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. Bye.